All right. So I do archaeological surveys in a 19th century mining district in the Western US. And as many of you know, women are an excellent research topic in such mining districts. Most historical research is focused on women in the mining communities, however, not on women as miners. This isn't surprising, of course. Based on the data, archaeologists and historians have long considered 19th century mining to be a male-dominated industry in the Western US. A leading mining historian that many of you know has noted American history has placed the exploitation of minerals firmly in the hands of males. As we look at the three major levels of miners, owners, managers, and laborers, there are virtually no women among them. His observation is consistent with that of other historians and archaeologists to this day. That isn't to say, of course, that women weren't involved in the industry. Independently wealthy women invested in limited liability mining corporations, though their numbers were, of course, minuscule compared to the number of male investors. Historians have documented notable women who owned all or portions of mine claims outright, including Eiley Bowers, who you see here on the Comstock lode. But these women were notable because they were apparently so rare. The history of the California gold rush, Nevada's Comstock lode, and early mining in Utah and Colorado feature limited, albeit celebrated, stories of women who prospected and mined in the 1850s through the 1880s. For example, in 1851, in California's gold country, Elizabeth Carrington purportedly found the gold that set off the rush at Jackass Hill, where Samuel Clemens, that you may know as Mark Twain, was to live and write for a time. And I mentioned Elizabeth because you will meet her again later in this presentation. In 1863, Matilda Reed was the first to discover silver ore in Bingham Canyon, Utah, and she purportedly filed a claim in her own name. And in 1865, Mark Twain wrote that the husband of Elizabeth, who I mentioned just a moment ago, the woman who found the Jackass Hill gold, met a Madam D dressed in the garb of a male miner and carrying mining tools. This apparently frightened Tim Carrington. In 1871, the newspaper Territorial Enterprise, which had previously been edited by Twain, commented about some women who were excavating a mine in the Virginia City, Nevada vicinity. The editor wrote, "We do not see any reason why women should not engage in mining as well as men." Yet, according to researchers such as Sally Zanjani, Jane Bartle, and others, women prospectors and miners didn't really begin to appear in our historical record until the 1890s. And again, they were notable because they constituted an insignificant portion of the mining population. Well, enter Mineral King, or rather a set of immense 1,000-page volumes of the Mineral King Mining District records. It took me years of searching to find them in the county archives and years more to transcribe and catalog each entry. I think you'll agree, though, that it was worth the time. Astonishingly, I found women in those records, and not just a few. Here are the names of the female mine claim owners as they appear in the Mineral King Mining District location notices and transfers recorded during the mining rush. It's a pretty substantial number. It's 36, actually. Indeed, during the mining rush, up to 10.28% of the mine claim owners were women. So I think even the least curious among us would want to know, who are these women and why did they acquire mine claims in Mineral King? This evening, I'll take you on a very brief virtual journey to Mineral King to explore these questions. First, I'll provide some context, and then I'll introduce you to the very first woman to sign her name on a mine claim notice in Mineral King. We'll then move on to evidence suggesting the potential motivations and objectives of the miners in having female mine claim ownership and what the data suggest. And along the way, I'll introduce you to more of the women. So the Mineral King Mining District, covered more than 20,000 acres of mountainscape in the southern Sierra Nevada in California. It was located in what is now Sequoia National Forest and Sequoia National Park, which were and still are known for their immense flora. I'm taking some of you have visited there. The mining district was remote, and it featured granite peaks, hanging lakes, cascading waterfalls, and marble caves. At its historic center is a 165-acre glacial valley hosting the headwaters of the East Fork of the Kaweah River. The valley lies at about 7,800 feet in elevation. Sheer cliffs and 30 to 55% slopes surround the valley and rise to peaks that reach 12,500 feet. Pleistocene epoch glaciers carved the landscape, exposing a complex geology comprising marble, limestone, slate, granite, and metamorphosed ash from South Sea underwater volcanoes, much of it rich in iron. Especially in the areas where marble or limestone is in contact with slate or plutonic rock, there are mineralized bands, often containing sulfide ores such as silver-bearing galena and sphalerite, as well as copper sulfides. Ore-bearing mineralized bands, known as lodes, extend in roughly parallel lines across the region. Silver and copper-bearing ore was discovered in Mineral King as early as the 1860s, well, mid-1860s. However, the remote location of the area and lack of publicity delayed any attempts to exploit the mineral resources until 1873. In the autumn of that year, several male spiritualists recorded the first silver mining claims, thereby instigating a mining rush in the area that lasted through 1882. Mineral King's remote location remained a challenge, however, compounded by the miners' limited knowledge, equipment, and financing. Nevertheless, by the end of 1873, 84 claims were located. There were 184 more located in 1874 and 90 more in 1875. A group of copper miners from Antioch, California, that's north of here, incorporated the potentially corrupt New England Tunnel and Smelting Company in late 1875. It was a limited liability stock company ostensibly intended to provide the organizational structure and funds necessary to build a road, construct a sawmill and smelter, and hire labor. By 1876, the company had caught the attention of the West's most active mining speculators, and the company's new trustees included men that many of you may be quite familiar with from your own research. For example, William Stewart, U.S. Senator from Nevada, who was concurrently embroiled in a mining stock fraud scandal. William Henry Harrison Hart, a deceitful British lawyer who was to become California's Attorney General under false qualifications. James Green, the California State Controller and land agent for the Central Pacific Railroad. And James Morgan, a litigious mine owner, superintendent, and investor whose mining successes made him a seemingly credible promoter. Despite all these dignitaries, the company didn't last long. It failed in 1878 as a result of mismanagement, difficulty in extracting silver from the sulfide ore, an avalanche that destroyed some of the company's structures, and quite possibly fraud. The late 1870s saw a proliferation of limited liability stock companies, with at least 8 established in 1879. Most notable among them was the Empire Gold and Silver Mining Company. It was led by Thomas Fowler, a wealthy rancher, 2-time state senator, and gubernatorial candidate. With the failure of Fowler's enterprise in 1882, due once again to avalanche damage and a shortage of funds, the mining rush essentially ended. So you're probably wondering what happened to Mineral King's women during this time. Because California's Central Valley was hot, dusty, and disease-ridden during the summer months, the women and children of the mining families were in Mineral King. There they engaged in the activities we might expect, including cooking, cleaning, and childcare. Multiple children were born in Mineral King, with the girls invariably named Minnie and the boys named King. Some of the women ran businesses. For example, Carmelita ran one that apparently catered to the community's more salacious interests. Nearby, Mary Harrington and her 9-year-old daughter, Sarah, ran a boarding house. I've read that pretty much every mining community had a Mary Harrington running a boarding house. 16-year-old Rosa was deputized as a district recorder. She collected $5 per recording and a remarkably large number of shares in New England Tunnel and Smelting Company stock. And of course, some women were acquiring all or portions of mine claims. The orange bars here on this chart show the number of women mine claim owners each year. This map shows the claims owned entirely or partially by the women in orange. The map excludes most of the claims now in Sequoia National Forest, though, because those haven't been surveyed yet. It is time to meet the woman who started it all. Harriet Rhea was born in Jefferson County, Illinois in 1834. She lost her father before she turned 4, and her mother subsequently married a Methodist minister. The family journeyed to California in 1852 on a well-documented trip that purportedly featured harrowing and nearly fatal adventures. In 1856, Harriet was in the town of Hills Ferry, marrying Jesse Hill. It was considered the most lawless town in California at the time. Jesse owned the ferry, a hotel, a warehouse, and a general store. Together, they formed the core of a settlement that sheltered prostitutes, bandits, gamblers, and outlaws, as well as miners, shepherds, and turkey herders. According to legend, Harriet even had to contend with the head of the bandit Joaquin Murrieta on the porch of her hotel. The couple had 4 children, 2 of whom were deaf. The Hills sold out in 1870, proclaiming they'd be happy never to see Hills Ferry ever again. The spring of 1874 found the Hills in the Mineral King mining district town of Bullion City, where Jesse and Harriet located the 2nd extension south on the Bullion Lode on June 18th. By signing her name on the notice, Harriet became the first woman to co-locate or locate a mine claim in the district. Harriet's claim was located in a beautiful part of the district alongside a precipitous cliff. Harriet, along with her family and friends, mined there for at least 4 summers. The Hills spent their winters in Santa Barbara, where they ran a large sheep ranch. Their mining days ended in 1877 when a severe drought killed 15,000 of their sheep. Thereafter, Harriet and Jesse ranched on a smaller scale and coped with Harriet's failing health. Harriet succumbed to cancer 3 days before her 53rd birthday. So Harriet owned a mine claim with several men, including her husband. But does that qualify her as a mine claim owner, let alone a prospector or a miner? And what about the men who owned it with her? When I introduce Mineral King's female mine claim owners, people almost invariably discount the presence of women on the mine claim location notices and transfer records. They ask if there was a strategic reason men had women locate or relocate claims, if women included women as owners as a courtesy or an act of frivolity, and if the women, especially the widows, were silent, inactive partners included only for their financial contributions. These questions are, of course, indicative of our biases. I am not, of course, asked these questions about the men. In asking these questions about the women, are we in essence seeking support for an established assumption that the women were not veritable prospectors, miners, or owners, and that the men were? Yet, given that mining landscapes are gendered landscapes, these questions are arguably valid. Nevertheless, we need to be aware that they are based on a substantively biased foundation and that we risk minimizing and invalidating the role of women mine claim owners without a defensible basis for doing so. Perhaps because I'm an archaeologist, I love this cautionary example from 1929. After decades of assuming these women at an archaeological site were tourists or visitors, we only recently, just this last year, learned that they, along with the men, were the archaeologists. So for today's discussion, I decided to take a different approach than I usually take, and I will address the questions I most often hear as a way to briefly introduce you to the women and their potential motivations. One assumption that I've heard frequently is that the men had women take on mine claim ownership in order to meet a strategic objective, such as increasing the number of mine claims under control of the male, or increasing the male's ownership of a particular lode. There was no restriction on the number of claims an individual or a group could own in the mining district. The regulations associated with the Mining Act of 1872 did, however, state that in no event can a claim exceed 1,500 feet in length, whatever the number of persons composing the association of owners. One of the ways groups of miners got around this constraint was by having different members locate adjacent claims on a lode. So some of the mine claims owned by women were, in fact, adjacent to those owned by husbands or other male family members. Could this have been a way to extend a man's effective claim from 1,500 to 3,000 feet in length? Take Rachel Enlow. In early 1874, she was a 21-year-old unmarried spiritualist living on a remote ranch with her family. In June, she became the second woman in the district to sign her name on a mine claim location notice. Even more notable, she was the first woman to become the sole owner of a mine claim in the district. Her claim was adjacent to her father's on the Orofino lode. 2 years later, her mother located a claim similarly adjacent to her husband's on another lode. Also, in 1874, the district's most active female, Rhoda McGinnis, located mine claims adjacent to her husband on the same lode at the age of 18. And there are several more examples. Indeed, 29% of the claims located by women were adjacent to the claims of the husbands or fathers of the women. So one might wonder, are we seeing the hint of a pattern here? Perhaps, but perhaps not. If having women own an adjacent mine claim on a lode enabled men to essentially double the size of their claims, would that not occur with some frequency? Yet only 8 of the 115 married male mine claim owners had claims adjacent to claims located or co-located by their wives, and only 2 men had mine claims adjacent to claims located by their daughters. Furthermore, the mining district evidently didn't prohibit individuals and groups from explicitly owning adjacent claims on the same lode. Individuals and groups began to acquire adjacent claims in 1875. For example, that year, the New England Tunnel and Smelting Company acquired multiple adjacent claims. A further look at the women who claimed or co-claimed extensions to male family members' claims provokes additional doubts. Remember Rachel? The same day that she became the first female sole owner of a mine claim in the district, she became sole owner of a second mine claim that was not on the same lode as any of her male relatives' claims. Similarly, our tool-bearing Rhoda owned all or portions of other mine claims that were not adjacent to those of male relatives. 6 out of the 10 women who extended their husbands' or father's claims also located or co-located claims that were not extensions of male family members' claims. Furthermore, in no case did a man sell his wife's share of a mine claim adjacent to his own. Same thing with the daughters. In 3 cases, the women sold their shares themselves and for a considerable profit. And finally, a close look at the claims themselves clearly indicates that most were probably not strategic extensions of male family member claims. This includes claims owned with people in a different group, including claims owned by multiple women. One such claim, known as the women's claim, was an appropriation of the area in which 2 male-owned claims overlapped. Although this claim did not comply with federal regulations at the time, it was honored by the mining district. One of the women sold her shares to 3 different men, but the claim remained under the control of the women for 3 years, and it was subsequently relocated by men who continued to call it the women's claim. Another supposition I've heard is that the men had women relocate claims in cases in which the men had not expended the requisite $100 per year in claim development. The data do suggest that the Mineral King miners initially interpreted the regulations as prohibiting mine claim owners from relocating their claims in such circumstances. Could men have had their wives relocate claims as a workaround? As a 24-year-old mother of 2, Rebecca Kane relocated her husband's eponymous claim in 1879. Kit Carrington, the daughter of Mark Twain's Elizabeth and Tim Carrington, relocated her father's claim in 1879 when she was 19 and unmarried. Rhoda, whom we've met a couple of times already, also relocated her husband's claims. In all, 26% of the female-owned claims were relocations of claims owned by the women's male family members. Some of the same caveats apply here as applied in our prior discussion, however. And here's something to ponder. Just because a male or female had a claim adjacent to the claim of a family member or relocated a claim previously owned by a family member, can we assume that that person was not an active mine claim owner, miner, or prospector? Can we really posit that such a supposition is valid only if the person is a woman? How can we ascertain how serious the female miners were about their claims? Let's go back to Tim Carrington, the husband of Elizabeth, who had started the Jackass Hill Rush, and the miner whom Mark Twain noted was fearful of a female miner. In August of 1875, he seemingly got over his fear. He and Bill Kaysen located a claim with Tim's 16-year-old daughter, Kate, and Bill's 26-year-old sister-in-law, Jane, who was visiting from Missouri. They called the claim the Katie Jane. Now, this might have been a frivolous act. Or take Edith Brush, who located a claim with her 30-year-old brother, George, in 1875. She was listed first on the location notice. Could this have been a sentimental act on the part of George? And then there is 17-year-old Flora Montgomery of Farmington in 1877 and located a claim that she named the Flora. Does that sound frivolous? Well, if multiple claims are indicative that the women were serious, it's worth considering that 11 of the 36 women owned or co-owned multiple claims, and that 5 more relocated their claims in subsequent years. Women owned some of the claims for multiple years, especially those claimed by women alone. Mary Mankins and Margaret Meadows had the record. They owned one claim, the Springload claim, for 4 years, which suggests they were able to make the necessary $100 annual investment for 3 years. 8 of the women acquired claim shares by purchasing them. For example, Flora of the Flora claim also acquired a share of one of the most promising claims for $50. A group of 4 women, both married and unmarried, purchased the Iron Cap Discovery claim for $50 in 1876. Meanwhile, the married women who owned the women's claim were purchasing shares in nearby claims. Rather than suggesting passive mine claim ownership, the historic documents suggest that the women were willing to flout state and federal laws to exercise their rights of ownership. The claim transfer records are intriguing in this regard. The mining business was relatively lucrative for the women. They earned today's equivalent of $70,000 selling all or portions of their claims. And they did better than the men, earning an average annual revenue of $220 per transaction compared to the men's average of $186 per transaction. 5 of the women who sold all or portions of their mine claim shares repeatedly, by the way, were married. This is an especially fun fact when we consider that this was a violation of California state law at the time. Women also violated state and federal voting laws. In 1876, 2 female mine claim owners voted in the mining district election. This was 35 years before they were legally permitted to vote in California, and 44 years before they gained the right to vote in federal elections. Interestingly, their votes decided the election. These were not necessarily women who stayed within the domestic feminine sphere and aspired to the Victorian middle class ideal. So far, I've provided anecdotal and data-based evidence that might be used either to support or refute some of the biased assumptions I've encountered. Clearly, a more structured analytical model is needed to derive any defensible inferences. Accordingly, I developed both a comparative framework and an analytical framework to assess the gender roles associated with individual female mine claim owners and their mining claims. This diagram depicts social system spheres here, external influences as interrelated spokes, and the power dynamics associated with independent social agency in the center. The primary data sources I used in assessing external influence are indicated by the red dots. The power dynamics portion at the core of the framework is based entirely on Suzanne Spencer Wood's feminist inclusive heterarchical model of plural and changing power dynamics. Spencer Wood's model has already been employed successfully in the analysis of gendered power dynamics in mining districts. Accordingly, employing her model to explore Mineral King's power dynamics should facilitate some interesting comparative analyses. So what happened after 1880? Well, female as well as male mine claim ownership plummeted with the introduction of more limited liability stock companies. The story of the women's role as mine claim owners was not passed down to subsequent generations and was not included in our histories. By the time I came along, their role had been forgotten. The stories we tell about ourselves that define us as individuals are in turn defined and framed by our cultural narratives. Together, our personal and cultural narratives give us a sense of self-identity, a sense of place, and a sense of time. Yet the stories we tell about our past exclude important individuals and groups of people. Thus, our cultural narratives weaken, and so do we as individuals. Female voices are among those that have been most excluded from our narratives. And this has tangible consequences. I come from a part of the country where female poverty is extremely high, the gender pay gap large, and female representation in leadership roles low. Here and elsewhere, returning women to our historical narratives is critically important. As noted by Sally Zanjani, Jane Bartle, and others, the discoveries we have made thus far about the role of women in mining may be only the tip of the iceberg. It is entirely possible that there are other historic mining districts in the Western US with similar women. I respectfully submit that it is time that their stories be told. So thank you, everybody. I look forward to your comments and your questions.
Thank you very much, Laylee. Okay, I guess if you stop sharing, we can see people.
Yeah, let me do that.
Get
just
some
a second
questions.
here. There we go.
Questions or comments?
Are people still muted?
Okay, I was going to wait till later for my input, but for my family history in mining, several, let's see, my great-great-grandmother was one of the founders of the Missouri suffragette movement. And I think as a result of that, each of her sons, after they married, and in Nevada, all of their wives had mining claims and stock.
Wow.
I am not sure that they had anything to do with the actual running of the said mines. According to the social papers, they were very active in the women's side of teas and fundraising and things like that. But the women all had property in their names.
And they were married?
Yep. So that could be something here. You mentioned some people from, or at least one woman out of Missouri. So if she had any connection to the Missouri suffragette movement or influence for that, maybe that spurred her on to have property in her name.
Yeah, actually several came from Missouri, but most of them came over in the 1850s. So to the extent that the suffragette women movement was active at that point, they could very well have been influenced by it.
Would it be fun for you to find a primary source like a woman's diary or journal or something that described exactly what they were doing, why they were doing it, and something like that to confirm? There's so many gaps, and once in a while you stumble upon it. If you look long enough, far enough, that someone comes up with something, say, "This is what I've been looking for," and just a great story that so much information is lost. I'm in the East, and some of our mining districts, I'd say 95% of the information is gone. There's no photographs at all, and so you might find someone's gravestone in a graveyard, And you
Right.
might find them in the census, and you're trying to build, you have no primary information about these things. So when you do get something good like that, if there's a family papers or whatever, but someone would have to take the time to write down why they were doing what they were doing,
Right. Right.
and put it in the context of when they got to the district and what they did in the district and what was happening in the district and then why they left the district and all like that. And that's few and far between, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. We do have some letters and some journal entries from just one of the women, but she did not discuss why she claimed a mine. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Are any of you familiar with any other mining districts that have a similar number of female mine claim owners during this period, the 1870s?
I saw a little of that in Tombstone in researches that I did there. There's a famous woman whose name I'm sure is familiar to almost all of you, is Nellie Cashman, was an Irish immigrant who was active in these areas. And she was in the Tombstone district. Her name appears in as the owner of mining claims, but I couldn't find any evidence that she'd actually done any silver mining. And silver mining is kind of prejudiced, not just against women, but against the little guys, because it's so technically complex. Gold mining, it's just out there, you go do it. And so I expect very much that she was probably not mining in Tombstone. What she was doing in Tombstone was speculating. And I think that's pretty widespread, male and female. Basically, they're just playing the lottery. They're trying to hit the big claim and all of that. But Cashman, of course, famously hears about that whole Klondike thing and just excuses herself from the continental United States and goes in for the next 30 years. She does gold mine actively I can't remember on the Klondike, but certainly on claims in Alaska, north of Fairbanks. I wrote this article a couple of years ago, so it's all gone away, the names. But there was a
Walnut Creek?
Well, up by Coldfoot and what's the other one north of there? Wiseman, little town of Wiseman. She had claims outside of Wiseman and was actively involved in physically at least managing miners at a minimum, and maybe doing some mining of her own. In terms of that. So there's a woman that I think kind of worked both ends of that angle, right? She speculated in some places, and then in other places she was actively engaged.
Yeah. There's definitely some, go
And I
ahead.
think that's true of a lot of men as well. What we notice, one thing you notice in the census, if you follow the census over a series of intervals, by the decades, is people switch jobs all the time. I mean, it's not, I studied to be a historian, a history professor, and now I'm going to be a history professor for the next 40 years. That's not really how it worked. I mean, sometimes they're laborers, and then the next census they're miners, and the census after that they're running a boarding house. And so I think that's again both a male and female thing. So the fact that she switched roles or jobs or focus is in that sense not exceptional. She's doing what a lot of people were doing.
Interesting. One thing that I've noticed that's a little bit of an adjunct to what you've been talking about, not so much women filing claims, but groups of women forming mining investment clubs, if you will. I know there was one in my local district, which is the lead zinc district of southwestern Wisconsin. Northwestern Illinois and northeastern Iowa, there was at least one women's club of investors that purchased stock in various mining operations. And I think I've heard of that elsewhere. They're operating as investors, not so much claimants. That might be something that would be interesting to look into as well.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that was not actually legal in California at the time. The Civil Code of 1872 did not allow married women to engage in investments of that sort or any kind of business transaction unless the Superior Court judge had declared them capable of doing so. So that was unlikely for the women at this time. And they were also, these particular women were not wealthy. So that would have made it unlikely in that regard as well. Later on, though, that would have been feasible.
How would they get named or deemed capable of doing so?
They would have to, the husband would have to agree, and they would have to go to court, and the judge then would determine whether or not the woman would be able to run her own business and retain any income that she earned from that business.
And did anyone ever argue against any of the elections that they voted in when they were running those mines?
Yes, they had election judges though, and in this case, the election judge had a wife who was one of the mine claim owners. So that may have been one of the reasons why he decided that their votes would count. The article that I showed in the presentation was one of the letters to the editor that was written stating that the Mining Act of 1872 needed to be updated to clarify that women should not be mine claim owners and should not be able to vote in mining district elections, which did not happen. Somebody just sent me a message asking about some of their influences. One of the aspects I've been looking at is the religion of these women. Several of them were spiritualists. And in 1872, of course, the first woman to run for president was a spiritualist. And so the spiritualists believed very strongly in women's equality. And so that may have been a factor. Another large percentage of them were Cumberland Presbyterians. That was a branch of the Presbyterian Church that had been ousted from the Presbyterian Church because they wished to give women a stronger role in the church, and they came over to this part of the country. And so a good percentage of the Mineral King population were also Cumberland Presbyterians. And so that may have influenced some of those women as well.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So those of you who have worked in different mining districts, I'm curious how you would imagine a gendered landscape being different if women were actively involved in the mining. Do you think that's something that would be reflected materially in the mining district?
Again,
That's an interesting question. The district that I'm interested in and that I actually live in is in Northern Nevada. And it was founded in the early 20th century. So that's a little bit different than the Mineral King district. But the major mill that operated here was operated by a woman, and that the memory of her operation was retained by residents. And that's how I found out about her, and then found records that corroborated that. But I can't imagine how that would have changed really the landscape, other than residents commenting that it was Mrs. Guyman's mill and Mr. Guyman never seemed to be here. And the records we can look at now shows that he was in Montana and not in Nevada. But other than that, it's sort of fascinating that there isn't a remnant of that sort of gendered landscape, other than that assumption, as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, that because it's mining, it must have been men, and so that mill up there must have been run by a man.
Right.
That's really the difference.
Okay.
Molly Kathleen Gortner in the Cripple Creek district is another one. The Molly Kathleen mine, which is now the tourist mine up there, was owned by her, not named after her.
Did she name it after herself?
I don't know. I don't know that answer to that question.
So many mines have women's names, and
Yeah, that was the thing that you
Yeah.
named the wife or the girlfriend or whatever. So they did do some of that, but no, this is, as I say, Molly Kathleen is Molly Kathleen Gortner, and she owned the thing. And it paid pretty well in its day.
Didn't Molly Kathleen actually own more than one mine in Cripple Creek, Eric?
Yeah, we're now we just run out the back of my expertise on this subject. I think she probably did. As I say, I think that's pretty common. Again, people just sort of play in the field in terms of the more chances you have, the more chances you have to hit, right? So I think that's not the only thing that she owned, probably. That's certainly most significant of her most successful of her claims.
In southwestern Virginia, it was pretty much the kind of gone with the wind social structure. Women, what few pictures there are of women, have them all dolled up for some kind of a social event or something. And there's most all the records show just male ownership. The thing that's very interesting is that we have a large belt of iron mines all up and down the Appalachians, and almost I would say at least half of them are all named for women. The furnaces that the mine served are all named for women.
Huh.
Lucy Jane, the Lucy, the Grace, and even we did have a Grace mine, I think, even, and they all happen to be either daughters or wives of the local owners.
Right. So honoring women, right?
Yes.
Just like ships.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard Francavilla gave that talk in Michigan in 1997 and talked about the thinking of furnaces as a woman giving birth and all those kind of things, and naming them like people name their cars Bessie and
Right.
all the names that people give to ships and all like that reflects the same idea. So it's there is some honor and respect there, but there's also not. So.
Yeah, yeah. There were a lot of mine claims named after women in Mineral King as well. There was the Anna Fox, who is named after Anna Fox, and she was in Wales, right, at the time. So she was heading scientific institution, studying advances in mining. So definitely honoring her. There was Lady Franklin, who was quite popular at the time, seeking John Franklin, and she had been touring through California. But most of the female, the mine claims that were named after women were actually named after mine claims in other districts, mine claims that had been successful, or that they thought might be successful, like the Emma. And I'm not sure what the motivation for that was, but they weren't named for the most part, weren't named for any local women in Mineral King.
Might have been an attempt to blow smoke at investors, the name your mine after a really famous and successful mine and hope to draw in a little money doing that. That might have been the thing.
Yeah.
Or just, just the luck of it. Maybe some of that luck will rub off on us.
Yeah, they did that in Maryland. They named the mine in the right after the Civil War, the Newborough Mining Company, which was named after the Burra Burra Mining Company of Ducktown, Tennessee, which was trying to capitalize on the Burra Burra mine in Australia. So it was all about investor marketing to investors.
I have one little sidebar that I just I pulled it up on my cell phone because I couldn't remember specifics. But from my district, specifically Shullsburg, Wisconsin, there's a very interesting home that was built there in 1850 by a Bostonian woman. She was a famous Shakespearean actress at the time. Her name was Kate Richmond, and it was built under somewhat unusual circumstances. She was performing in Chicago and went to a party where they broke out a Ouija board, and the Ouija board apparently directed her to move to Shullsburg, Wisconsin, where she would take $8 million from the ground. In fact, she did. She moved to Shullsburg. She built an ornate house there that had a 4-story tower on it, so she could view all of her mine investment. She bought a number of mines in the Shullsburg area, and was apparently successful, although I don't know if she ever made the 8 million. But she could go up on the top of the tower and view her various mine operations from the top of the tower. So it might be kind of interesting to research Kate Richmond and her mine
Yeah.
holdings in the 1850s. She was a very prominent Bostonian, apparently. Unfortunately, the tower is gone. I think there was a fire in the house, and the tower was ultimately razed. But the home is still there, sort of, but the tower is gone.
Yeah, thank you. I'll definitely look her up.
I'd like to know, is most research done in this way? Like, I really enjoyed how you talked about the research question and then the way that you went about answering that, basically using the scientific method. Is that kind of standard practice, or is that more unique to the what you're doing?
I don't know, should I let some others answer that? I'm a historical archaeologist, so my approach may be different from others. I tend to be, I look at both the ground, the material manifestations of history as well as documentation. And I definitely tend to approach things in a more structured fashion. But many of the historians here may do the same thing.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
I think the best work comes from a well-structured research question that then is that background is provided how and where the sources, how you found the sources and how you use them. I am guilty, however, of running off on tangents and perhaps not being as clear as tonight's presentation, which I really enjoyed lately, and I hope that you are thinking about doing some publication of it. There is not enough written in the secondary literature about women in the mining industry, and especially in the 19th century, because that research requires you to go to all those books that you had piled there in that one slide. It's not something that can be researched online, certainly in the 19th century. So I'm hoping you're thinking about publication. I think it would be an important addition.
Thank you. My research has been somewhat delayed because we've had, COVID, of course, and we had 2 years of catastrophic fires and 1 year of catastrophic flooding. And so I feel that I have a lot more research to do before I could consider publication.
I was just curious. I was just a little bit curious about the Mineral King district. I'm sitting out here in Virginia, so I don't know very much about the California districts. But was it a successful mining district, or was it what sort of the economic history of it?
Yeah, it was not successful. It definitely had some valuable minerals in it, but the timing was really bad. So there was the demonetization of silver in 1873. And they were in the midst of the first Great Depression or the Long Depression. We had a drought here at the time. They definitely didn't have the finances that they needed to be able to exploit the minerals in the district. And the terrain was similar to a lot of the terrains like in Colorado, for example, where it was extremely steep. The slope was ideal for avalanches. And the people who were investing in this area weren't prepared to deal with those kinds of challenges. So their mining continued actually into the 1930s when it was made a game refuge, and the government decided that a game preserve wasn't it wasn't game, but an animal preserve wasn't compatible with mining. And so it ended at the end of the 1920s, but not with the same kind of intensity that we saw in the 1870s through 1882. It eventually became a resort community, and a lot of the miners took up the resort business. And it remains a resort community within Sequoia National Park to this day.
Interesting.
And it isn't a mining district that people know of in general, in part because it's a part of Sequoia National Park. I had to get special permission in order to be able to give a presentation like this. It's, you know, almost everything that's done within the national parks tends to be gray literature and isn't something that can be given to the public, right? And so that's why in my map I had to have the blank background so you wouldn't know exactly where it was. But hopefully more of these mining districts that are under government jurisdiction right now, hopefully there'll be more of them will be researched and more of the information will be made available to other people.
That raises kind of another question. Were any of the claims patented? And if so, they should be public records of that, and the Park Service should not be able to put the lid on that.
Yes, there were patented claims. At this point, only one of the mine claims, and well, I'm sorry, two of the mine claims and two of the mill site claims remain in private ownership. The rest of them were handed over to the government. So at this point, they remain private in holdings. The majority of it is owned by Walt Disney Company. They had been planning to make a year-round resort in Mineral King, and so they had acquired what private property they could, and so they still own it. But yeah, so that is part of the public record.
Okay, anything else? Anybody else?
Barbara, let me throw out something that's not related to very much to this evening's presentation, but
Okay.
it's an avalanche story. From when those of you that attended the Mining History Conference in Creede many years ago may remember some of the stories there of the perils of avalanches. Well, a new book, kind of a pamphlet-y sort of book, has just been published on the sulfur mining just on the south end of Creede. You remember you drove up into Creede and went up the canyon where all the silver mines were. Well, if you went on the other side of the main road, up one of the gulches, there was a very interesting sulfur mine. And you think, why? How could they be mining sulfur when people were out looking for silver and gold? Well, sulfur was a valuable ingredient in fertilizers, and so they were selling sulfur to the fertilizer companies, and that was then hence going out to the farmers out in the flatlands. Well, Kathy Getz, who was a summer resident in Creede and lives down in Wetherill, Texas, in the wintertime. She has written a very, very interesting book, and it's I should have brought it along, but I'll bring it to the next Zoom meeting. Very, very interesting story about an unusual type of mining in Colorado. And the most interesting thing is they actually have found a couple of pictures in a chemical journal that shows the inside of this mill where they had a big cylindrical kind of retort cooker type of assembly. They would wheel mine cars full of the sulfur bearing ore. They would close the cylinder up and pump hot steam into it. It would melt the native sulfur in the rock, and it would kind of fill the bottom of the cylinder, and they dump it out. The other thing some of you might remember, we had a picture of an 8-wheeled ore cart from Creede a few years ago on the mining webpage, and this was at that time kind of an unknown piece of equipment. Well, it came from that sulfur mine. So if you want to read about a different slant on Colorado mining, this is a recommended little pamphlet.
Laylee, I have a question, which you said that Walt Disney still owns it, do they own the mining claims or do they own the land under the claims?
They own the mine claims. And yeah, one mine and 2 mill site claims.
Thank you.
Sure. They're not mining in them. In fact, they're kind of problematic because one of them was the mill site where amalgamation took place, and there's so there's some toxicity issues, and it also happens to be the location that has been the dump site for maybe 150 years, and so it's it's definitely a problematic bit of property for them.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We've had a very good turnout tonight. Yep. Laylee, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody.